The Dress by Dylan Thomas. They had followed him for 2 days over the length of the county, but he had lost them at the foot of the hills and hidden in a golden bush, had heard them shouting as they stumbled down the valley. Behind a tree on the ridge of the hills he had peeped down onto the fields where they hurried about like dogs, where they poked the hedges with their sticks and set up a faint howling as a mist came suddenly from the spring sky and hid them from his eyes. But the mist was a mother to him, putting a coat around his shoulders where the shirt was torn and the blood dry on his blades. The mist made him warm. He had the food and the drink of the mist on his lips, and he smiled through her mantle like a cat. He worked away from the valleyward side of the hill into the denser trees that might hide him and lead him to light and fire and a basin of soup. He thought of the coals that might be hissing in the grate, and of the young mother standing alone. He thought of her hair. Such a nest it would make for his hands. He ran through the trees and found himself on a narrow road. Which way should he walk? Towards or away from the moon? The mist had made a secret of the position of the moon, but in a corner of the sky where the mist had fallen apart, he could see the angles of the stars. He walked towards the north where the stars were, mumbling a song with no tune, hearing his feet suck in and out of the spongy earth. Now there was time to collect his thoughts, but no sooner had he started to set them in order than an owl made a cry in the trees that hung over the road, and he stopped and winked at her, finding a mutual melancholy in her sounds. Soon she would swoop and fasten on a mouse. He saw her for a moment as she sat screeching on her bough. Then, frightened of her, he hurried on, and had not gone more than a few yards into the darkness when, with a fresh cry, she flew away. Pity the hare, he thought, for the weasel will drink her. The road sloped to the stars, and the trees in the valley and the memory of the guns faded behind. He heard footsteps. An old man, radiant with rain, stepped out of the mist. "Good night, sir," said the old man. "No night for the son of a woman," said the madman. The old man whistled and hurried, half running, in the direction of the roadside trees. "Let the hounds know," the madman chuckled as he climbed up the hill. "Let the hounds know." And crafty as a fox, he doubled back to where the misty road branched off 3 ways. "Hell on the stars," he said, and walked towards the dark. The world was a ball under his feet. It kicked as he ran. It dropped. Up came the trees. In the distance, a poacher's dog yelled at the trap on its foot, and he heard it and ran the faster, thinking the enemies were on his heels. "Duck, boys, duck," he called out, with the voice of one who might have pointed to a falling star. Remembering of a sudden that he had not slept since the escape, he left off running. Now the waters of the rain, too tired to strike the earth, broke up as they fell and blew about in the wind like the Sandman's grains. If he met sleep, sleep would be a girl. The last 2 nights, while walking or running over the empty county, he had dreamed of their meeting. "Lie down," she would say, and would give him her dress to lie on, stretching herself out by his side. Even as he dreamed, and the twigs under his running feet had made a noise like the rustle of her dress, the enemy had shouted in the fields. He had run on and on, leaving sleep farther behind him. Sometimes there was a sun, a moon, and sometimes under a black sky he had tossed and thrown the wind before he could be off. "Where is Jack?" they asked in the gardens of the place he had left. "Up on the hills with a butcher's knife," they said, smiling. But the knife was gone, thrown at a tree, and quivering there still. There was no heat in his head. He ran on and on, howling for sleep. And she, alone in the house, was sewing her new dress. It was a bright country dress with flowers on the bodice. Only a few more stitches were needed before it would be ready to wear. It would lie neat on her shoulders, and 2 of the flowers would be growing out of her breasts. When she walked with her husband on Sunday mornings over the fields and down into the village, the boys would smile at her behind their hands, and the shaping of the dress round her belly would set all the widow women talking. She slipped into her new dress, and looking into the mirror over the fireplace, saw that it was prettier than she had imagined. It made her face paler and her long hair darker. She had cut it low. A dog out in the night lifted its head up and howled. She turned away hurriedly from her reflection and pulled the curtains closer. Out in the night they were searching for a madman. He had green eyes, they said, and had married a lady. They said he had cut off her lips because she smiled at men. They took him away, but he stole a knife from the kitchen and slashed his keeper and broke out into the wild valleys. From afar he saw the light in the house and stumbled up to the edge of the garden. He felt, he did not see, the little fence around it. The rusting wire scraped on his hands, and the wet, abominable grass crept over his knees. And once he was through the fence, the hosts of the garden came rushing to meet him, the flower-headed and the bodying frosts. He had torn his fingers while the old wounds were still wet. Like a man of blood, he came out of the enemy's darkness onto the steps. He said in a whisper, "Let them not shoot me," and he opened the door. She was in the middle of the room. Her hair had fallen untidily, and 3 of the buttons at the neck of her dress were undone. What made the dog howl as it did? Frightened of the howling and thinking of the tale she had heard, she rocked in her chair. What became of the woman, she wondered as she rocked. She could not think of a woman without any lips. What became of women without any lips, she wondered. The door made no noise. He stepped into the room, trying to smile and holding out his hands. "Oh, you've come back," she said. Then she turned in her chair and saw him. There was blood even by his green eyes. She put her fingers to her mouth. "Not shoot," he said. But the moving of her arm drew the neck of her dress apart, and he stared in wonder at her wide, white forehead, her frightened eyes and mouth, and down to the flowers on her dress. With the moving of her arm, her dress danced in the light. She sat before him, covered in flowers. "Sleep," said the madman, and kneeling down, he put his bewildered head upon her lap.